It is now confirmed, at least for now. Daniel Ricciardo's F1 career seems to have come to an end. The former Carb RB driver concluded the recently wrapped 2024 Singapore GP as the last of the finishers. Normally, this wouldn't be cause for celebration, but almost everyone covering the race had something positive to say about Daniel. Even the on-air commentators offered praise. For someone new to F1, this might have seemed unusual, but for those who have followed the sport for any length of time, it made perfect sense. The admiration shown by fans and media alike even earned Daniel the Driver of the Day accolade on F1's official website. So, why was there so much excitement over a driver who finished last? Despite the fact that it felt like a farewell, there's a chance this might not be the end of Ricciardo's F1 story. F1 photographer and insider Kim Illman hinted that the door may not be entirely closed. All I'll say is there might be a twist. It's a long shot, but there could be a twist. I can't say anymore, but I'm not 100% sure if the door is closed. Trust me, it will get back to the people, but there could be a twist. We will know in weeks, Kim revealed. So, while many believe this was Ricciardo's final race, fans are still holding on to hope for one last surprise in this unpredictable journey. To understand why Daniel Ricciardo means so much to so many fans, we must rewind all the way back to 2014. That season marked the beginning of the hybrid era in F1 and the beginning of Mercedes' 8-year domination. However, a side plot that year was what happened at Red Bull. They had dominated proceedings during the previous 4 years, with Sebastian Vettel winning 4 consecutive championships. He had a new teammate in Daniel Ricciardo for 2014, and everyone expected Vettel to easily outperform Daniel. However, it was Daniel who outperformed Vettel. He almost won his very first race with Red Bull as he crossed the line first, but was disqualified in the season opener in Australia. This wasn't his fault, as Red Bull exceeded the allowed fuel flow rate. He didn't have to wait long to win, as he would stand on the top step of the podium in Canada and then again in Hungary and Belgium. By the end of the season, he was the only non-Mercedes driver to win races, and he finished the season in third while his more acclaimed teammate finished fifth. More than the results, Daniel endeared himself to fans because of his highly likable and jovial nature off-track and his fierce and competitive approach on track. He made multiple breathtaking late-breaking moves in a car that a 4-time champion was finding difficult to drive at times. Daniel was earmarked as the next big talent in F1 who just needed a car that could fight far for the championship. Sadly, Daniel never got that opportunity. Vettel would leave for Ferrari the next year, making Ricciardo the #1 driver at Red Bull. It wouldn't amount to much, as Red Bull would slip behind Ferrari and Williams as well to end up as the 4th best team in F1. Daniel would gain just 1 podium and would narrowly finish behind his new teammate Daniil Kvyat in the championship. This was mostly due to bad luck, but Daniel still managed to pull off a few stunning moves, here and there, to keep his reputation intact as one of the most exciting drivers on the grid. Then came the 2016 season, the season that would change everything for Daniel Ricciardo. On the surface of it, nothing much changed for Daniel, as he would return to his winning ways in Malaysia. He would once again finish third in the championship behind the dominant Mercedes duo, but things had changed behind the scenes. After just 4 races, Daniel's teammate Kvyat would be replaced by F1's hottest new talent, Max Verstappen. While Red Bull publicly professed equal treatment for both their drivers, it was quite clear that when push came to shove and Red Bull had to pick one driver to put their weight behind, Max would be that driver. It also became evident that Red Bull had a long and difficult road in front of them as far as fighting for the championship was concerned. Daniel would manage to finish the 2017 season ahead of Max as well, but it was Max who took more wins, and he also managed to grab more headlines. Then came the 2018 season, the beginning of the end for Daniel. Daniel started the season on a high, by winning just the 3rd race of the season in China. However, the relationship between Max and Daniel, that had been mostly cordial until then, imploded in Baku. Daniel would take out Max during the race at the end of the main straight. While many felt that Max moved under braking and thus played a bigger role in the crash, rumors back then suggested that Red Bull chose not to blame Max. This was Daniel's clearest sign that Max was now the favored driver at Red Bull. He would take another heartwarming win in Monaco, but this would turn out to be his last F1 win in a long time. Despite being offered a lucrative contract extension to stay at Red Bull, Daniel would reject this offer to take what would turn out to be his worst decision in his F1 career. Daniel would choose to leave Red Bull to drive for Renault. On paper, this wasn't that poor of a decision. Red Bull had been powered by Renault up until then, but had made the decision to partner with Honda. While Honda are currently among the best engine manufacturers in F1, back then they were the laughingstock of the sport. An ill-fated return to the sport with McLaren in 2015 saw Honda building one of the slowest and the most unreliable engines on the grid. Even in 2018, they powered the third worst car on the grid. The fact that Red Bull would also switch to what was the worst engine manufacturer at that time, meant that Red Bull were almost destined to be slow for at least a few years. All of Daniel's success till then had come in a Renault-powered car, and driving for their factory team as their number one driver seemed like the better deal, but Daniel was so wrong. Honda would build a competitive engine right away, allowing Max to finish as the best of the rest behind the Mercedes drivers, while Daniel would end up in ninth, his worst championship position since his Toro Rosso days. While Daniel would improve to fifth in 2020, he was still a far cry from Max, who was cementing his place as the best driver behind the dominant Mercedes. Daniel had to admit that the Renault experiment wasn't working, and he decided to switch to McLaren from 2021. McLaren may have the best car on the grid now, but back then, they were a midfield team. To make matters worse, Red Bull and Honda had finally built a car capable of fighting for the championship that would allow Max to secure his maiden championship. Daniel would take his eighth and final F1 win in Monza after championship contenders Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen crashed, but either side of this win, Daniel had a pretty ordinary run at McLaren. He ended up outclassed by his younger teammate Lando Norris. The relationship with McLaren would ultimately take a turn for the worse in 2022, and Daniel's contract would be terminated prematurely at the end of that season, and for the first time, Daniel was left without a drive in F1 since 2011. With many new drivers making their mark in F1, the general consensus was that Daniel's F1 career was done and dusted, but he was given one last lifeline. He was welcomed back to the Red Bull family as a reserve driver. A lackluster season for Nick de Vries, who was driving for Red Bull's junior team, then known as AlphaTauri, allowed Daniel to get back to a full-time driving contract. Red Bull Sergio Perez's form had taken a turn for the worse, and this was seen as Daniel's golden opportunity to regain his seat at Red Bull, who were now fighting for wins and championships. Sadly, that would never become a reality, and that brings us to today, with Daniel Ricciardo's F1 career coming to an end before the season has even come to an end. Daniel Ricciardo's time at AlphaTauri, who became RB this year, has been utterly forgettable. It started with an underwhelming performance in Hungary. He failed to finish ahead of teammate Yuki Tsunoda in the race. This trend would continue in Spa, where Yuki finished in the points while Daniel ended up outside the top 15. To make matters worse, Daniel would suffer an injury during FP2 during the next race weekend that would sideline him from the Dutch GP and the 4 races after that. In his absence, Liam Lawson would take his place and would score points in just his 3rd race. Daniel would return in Austin and would finish a brilliant 7th in Mexico, but he was still outperformed by Yuki. In all, Daniel would be beaten by Yuki in both qualifying and race head-to-head in their brief time together in 2023. While Daniel wasn't beaten by a huge margin, as in both cases the score would be 4-3 in favor of Yuki, Daniel was expected to dominate Yuki given his previous exploits. 2024 didn't prove to be any better. Yuki would finish ahead of Ricciardo on 9 out of 17 occasions where at least of them finished. More importantly, Yuki managed to score 22 points while Daniel could only manage 12. Throughout this year, one thing has become painfully obvious. This was no longer the Daniel that was a demon on the brakes who could pull off daring overtakes with relative ease. This was a Daniel who usually struggled to get past the first round of qualifying. He often had trouble beating others, and more than once, he became the one to watch out for in a bad way. It became clear that things weren't going well for him. There was going to be no fairytale reunion for Daniel and Red Bull, or a dream return to fighting for wins or even a championship. This was a Daniel who had made far too many poorly timed decisions, and nothing but a miracle would resurrect his career. Unfortunately, for Ricciardo, this miracle would never come in the cutthroat world of F1. With Liam Lawson's supposed contract, forcing Red Bull to choose between either giving him a contract or losing him to another team, the end came sooner than later for Daniel. One of his most endearing qualities has been his straightforward approach to F1. He has always been open with his thought process, and that did not change on what has now become his last race in F1. He summed up his failed bid quite nicely after the race in Singapore.
Yeah, I'm obviously prepared for it, and that's why over the weekend I tried to acknowledge a few things as well with myself, and I think also acknowledge why I came back into the sport. You know, sometimes you got to see the big picture, and I always said I don't just want to be a guy that's here on the grid and fighting for a point every now and then, which has kind of been how this year's gone. Obviously, this year, the purpose was to try and then do good enough to get back into Red Bull and obviously fight for wins again and see if I've still got it. I feel like obviously I came up short with that, so I think then it's okay.
While it's sad to see a driver like Ricciardo being shown the door mid-season, He was never meant to be a driver just making up the numbers. He was once touted as the next big thing, a future champion. Regrettably, that remained a pipe dream. Maybe he deserved a better farewell, but 6 more races would have only prolonged the pain. So, as fans, all we can do is be thankful for all the thrill the Prime Honey Badger provided. All the showies and that wide smile that almost never failed to make an appearance even on his worst days is how Daniel should be remembered. Maybe Daniel deserved more, but we can take solace from the fact that his career was far from ordinary, and that is something worth savoring in all of its bittersweet glory. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting discussions about the fascinating world of motorsport. Also, leave a comment above to see your opinion about Danny's end of career. Let's have a debate. Until next time, stay with us and keep exploring the adrenaline of racing.